My name is Tim Cole, and I'm the Executive Director of Waypoint Church Partners. And Waypoint exists to come alongside leaders and churches and to help them navigate ministry together. And so we've been doing a webinar series all this year, sponsored by our ministry partner, Mid-Atlantic Christian University. And we've been doing a different topic each month, trying to help leaders in the church just get better at their particular area of ministry. So we've talked with elders, with worship team members, prayer team members, and tonight we are going to be talking to those of you who work on the tech team, particularly with the worship slides. And my role with Waypoint allows me to travel to a different church nearly every Sunday, and so I get to see the good and bad about what churches are doing, but I also get to do quite a bit of training, both for church planters and otherwise, and so I love to help churches in some just real nitty-gritty details about how to do things well at their church. So I'm glad that you're here with us. Let me see, we're doing good with our people who are logging in. While we are getting started here, the first thing I want to let you know is there are a couple of functions here on this interface that we will use. One of them is the Q&A button right down at the bottom of your screen. If you have a question as I'm talking tonight, you can hit that Q&A and your questions will go in a queue. And if we have time at the end of the session tonight, we will finish at 7:55 or no 8:25. Then we'll answer as many questions as possible. But also, if we don't get to your question, I have those in the queue that I'm able to answer via email over the next day or so. Another thing that I could tell you is that we will send out an automated email tomorrow with some links, or I'll attach a file of the slides that we have tonight. So if you have some questions about what was this or what was that, you will be able to grab that file of the slides. But I would encourage you to take some notes tonight. What we're going to deal with, I'm assuming that for most people that are on the webinar tonight, that most of you, about 80% of this, hopefully you've got already, but about 20% of it, you'll go, oh, I never thought of it that way, or yeah, we need to fix that at our church. And so hopefully there's 4 or 5 really strong takeaways tonight that you can start implementing immediately at your church. And so I want to dive right in. I've got quite a few slides to jump into, so I'm going to go back and forth between slides, and then we're going to go. I need to plug my computer in as well so it doesn't die right in the middle of our session. There we go. All right. Well, let me get back over to my slides. Well, first, the other functionality I want to do is drive a poll. I'm curious, taking attendance. Even though we have a number of people logged in, and we've seen people log in from as many as 11 states, different states on some of the webinars, just the number of computers is not the same as the number of people that are logged in. And so I'm curious how many people are logged in on your computer. We've got people responding already. And so if you'll let us know, that way we have a sense of attendance there. And so thanks for doing that. I'm going to leave that up for a minute. I also want to let you know, if you're one of the churches that supports Waypoint, Waypoint does a number of things, but one of the things we do is start new churches. And we have started 6 new churches this year. Here's a map of the churches that Waypoint has helped start since 1990, including 6 this year. It looks like a couple next year as well. And so we want to thank you for your partnership on that. And let's see, so the poll here is pretty much everybody's responded to that. Thank you for chiming in. We can figure out how many people are in. I've got a couple other polls that I'm going to drive later as well as we move into the webinar. Well, I want to talk about, let's see, let me get to this first slide. First, ask the question, why? I'm going to be sharing a bunch of real nitty-gritty details about projection, and so why should we talk about that? And I think that's a great question. One of the reasons why we should talk about this is because it's one of those things in the church that nobody notices until you screw up. It's kind of like the sound man as well on the tech team. If he does a clean service, nobody says anything. But the first time he doesn't turn that mic on when the preacher's ready to go, or whatever, everybody's looking back and saying, what's his problem? And the same is true for worship slides. And so, but the one thing that I want to say here is there's a scripture that, for me, kind of encapsulates why this is really important to talk about the little details of getting worship projection correct. And it's from 1 Corinthians chapter 14. It's really the last verse from 1 Corinthians 14, where the Apostle Paul kind of summarizes the whole chapter, and he says everything should be done decently and in order. And what he's referring to is the whole previous chapter is just some instructions to the church at Corinth, a relatively new church, about worship and how worship should happen on Sunday mornings at their church. And so at the end, he kind of summarizes and says, the reason I'm telling you all this, because when you do worship, you need to do it well. You need to do it right. And when you read actually the 2 or 3 chapters around this in Corinthians, you notice that one thing the Apostle Paul is really concerned about is how visitors are going to be impressed one way or the other, positively or negatively, by the things that you do in your worship services. And so there are guests coming to your church, and they are going to be making decisions about what they think about your church pretty quickly. And that's a whole other seminar that we give about how to get your first-time guests to come back. But one of the things that you learn is that first-time guests are making decisions about what they think about your church within the first 7 to 10 minutes that they're on your property, long before the preacher ever gets up in the pulpit. And so one of those things is what they see up on the screen when they arrive. So let's see here. I have shared this screen. So that's 1 Corinthians 14. And so what I want to say here is the reason we want to focus on this is because it matters. We have just a little bit of time for the corporate worship segment of our worship services that are for our public gatherings every week. So we've got this space up on stage and a limited amount of time. You know, it's half your service at most. Of course, there's slides going on during the sermon often as well. But the things that are going to be moving quite a bit. It's just an hour or so. And so it takes just a little bit of effort, extra effort, to get these things correct. And you need to create a culture of how do we get our volunteers to hold each other accountable so that we've got a culture of getting it right. It's always interesting to me. It's very interesting to me that as I travel, the larger the church is, the better they are at worship slides. And it doesn't make any sense to me because it has nothing to do with church size other than culture. If you go to a very large church and a church of 5,000 or 10,000, their worship slide projection is seamless, and it's free. You know, it's one of the things. There's so many things in most churches that we have no control over to try and fix. But one of the things that we can is whether our slides look good and move smoothly as we go through the service. Whether you're a church of 5,000 or a church of 50, we can get that right. But what we find is that there's a culture of excellence, the larger the church gets, that can be replicated all the way down to whether your church is 50 or 150 or 500 or 5,000. And so hopefully that's what we get out tonight more than anything else, is how do I create a culture among my tech team that we're going to get this right because it matters. And so let me move back here to the slides and move along. So we're going to talk about 3 categories tonight: hardware, software, and then user error that I see. Actually, they're going to be out of order: hardware, and then users, and then software, the composition of your slides. And we're going to have 4 items in the first one, 3 items in the second one, and then 9 in the third one as we talk about putting your slides together. And so when we talk about hardware, we're talking about when you come in the auditorium, what is it that we see up there? And I can tell you from visiting churches that there's some really common things that I see. Let's see. First of all, the first principle is to choose and adjust your projection screen layout. And what I mean by that is a couple of things. You have to make a decision about first of all, if most computer projection screens were purchased more than 10 years ago. Maybe your church has a widescreen, but if not, it's probably got the old format, 4:3 rather than 16:9. And in that case, what I'm seeing in a lot of churches is that they've got to make a decision about where they're going to put that. And usually they put that in the first of these few boxes, right in the middle of the screen. And I don't particularly like that. And so I would suggest that you pick either option number 2 or option number 3. And here's why. And here, what you can do with that is the value here is that I like to have the worship lyrics as close to the worship leader as possible without words being obstructed, behind the people that are ahead of you are getting in the way. But what I mean by that is whether you have dual screens on the side or one screen in the back, whatever, sometimes on these larger auditoriums, if you've ever been to a church where you've got to kind of play like a tennis match, you ever seen an audience at a tennis match where they're going like this and then like this? It's kind of like that for worship, where they look at the words, back at the worship leader, look at the words, back at the worship leader, or maybe it's worship leader and then the words up here and back down. And so I think we can mitigate that with the way that we choose to do that. And so sometimes the screen is very low, and we'll want to choose option number 2 here, or where we put the widescreen format at the top of that screen, or sometimes the words are too high, and we can put that, and people will forget about where that ribbon is that's not being projected on. And so that's a value of mine that I wonder if you can do, make an adjustment at your church about that. Also, if you have gone to widescreen and you don't have necessarily a widescreen format, you can sometimes adjust the amount of screen that's showing. Lots of churches I go into kind of look like this, one way or the other, that there's part that's not projected that's showing. And I'll ask them, is there any way to move your screen? And some of them are manual, where you can just raise it up a foot. Some of them, there's a motorized switch somewhere back behind the stage, and you can lower it a foot or raise it a foot to get it to match. It's as simple as just matching the widescreen format. And people will tell me, oh, I never thought of that. And so there you can just manually fix your screen so that it looks the same size as the format. I want to grab another poll. I'm just curious. Let me end this poll. And how do I get in here? I want to, how do I do that? Here we go. I'm curious if you are, let's go. Here we go. Let's launch this poll. Which format are you in at your church? Are you in the traditional 4:3, which is kind of the old school standard definition? Are you 16:9, which is the more widescreen, or you're not exactly sure? And so I would recommend going to widescreen if possible. It just makes you look more modern. The standard def really was about done 10, 12 years ago. Your computer and your software will all accommodate for it, and your projector if you can. But that would be something for the long haul if you're not there. But it just looks more modern very quickly if you could do that. All right, so many of you have chimed in on that. I'm going to leave that open for a minute. Let's go to the next slide here. The other thing for hardware I'd say is correct, this is obvious, but correct any keystoning or other margin issues. And what I mean by that, let me end this poll here. Bang, bang. And this is where it gets really picky, but the first one there, you can see that just a little bit of the margin is showing around the screen. That drives me bananas. And then the first one, the middle one here, what's going to happen there, maybe you've been in a church where this happens, is there's projecting behind the screen onto the wall behind the screen, and there's a little ribbon of bright light behind the screen because it's not been adjusted, it's too big. Or obviously if there's keystoning where the image has, usually it's keystone this way or this way. Sometimes it's even like this, where one side is to the other. But I would do anything in my power. This is something you can do for free, is to fix any of these margin issues so that they're not distracting. And there's a value for this for me, or a principle. And the value is that detail-oriented people like me notice these things. And it interrupts or distracts their worship. Now, I don't know what percentage are the detail-oriented people, what percentage of all the temperaments there are on the temperament spectrum, but I would guess that it's about either a quarter or a third of your audience are detail-oriented people, where they're noticing these little things. And if it were some other topic that we would talk about, if some other element of your worship service, and I could tell you that element is going to bother or interrupt or distract a quarter or a third of your audience, you would figure out how to fix that every week. And then we'll leave these little things around our projection that just goes on forever and ever and ever. And I'm telling you, people will talk about this, they notice right when they walk in, and it just is distracting to worship. And if you get your margins right, you just don't even notice. It just looks like a TV screen up there rather than anything else. So I'm going to go back to that and talk about a couple of these here. One is obviously you can correct any keystone by using the black felt border around your screen. It's there for a reason, and I see a lot of screens that look like this, where there's a little bit showing right here, like this left one here. But you can correct things. I don't know if you can see this, but this image right here has a couple of problems. One is that it's a little bit higher than it ought to be. The black margin there, let me see if I can increase that, is smaller than down here, but there's also some keystoning problems. But if you use the black felt correctly, that gray image on the right is the exact same one as on the left. It's just being hidden by the black felt that's on your screen, the border on your screen. And people don't know that they can run into that and fix a little bit of problems by doing that. So that's the first thing is hardware, is when you come in, does the image look great? If it's been a long time since you've upgraded your projector, it might not be bright enough. And it's amazing how inexpensive a bright projector is today versus 10 years ago. Also, your projection bulb will diminish its brightness over time. So if you're not ready to replace your projector, but you haven't replaced your bulb in years, you may want to do that, and you'll pick up about 20% of your lumens, your brightness, which also helps all the colors. They'll be richer on your screen as a result. So that's the hardware. And I want to remind you, if you've got any questions, you can hit the Q&A and we'll get that down to the end there. But that's the hardware part, is can you fix fix what's going on as people see the image. All right, second category that I want to deal with tonight are your slide transitions. And this is the one that everybody talks about. I can't tell you how many times I've been at Sunday lunch with people, and part of the conversation is about how bad the slide transitions were at that church. And it's just like if there's feedback every week, and then they talk about there's feedback every week. The same is true about the slide transitions. And so I want to talk about that just with three major principles. There's an art to getting your slide transitions right. And this is something that you've got to work on and rehearse and create a culture for. So the transition principle number one, and this is the key to all of this. Here, you might want to write this down. Worshipers should be able to read the entire first line of the next slide before articulating the first word of that slide. Does that make sense? And so what that means is, as that next slide pops up, my eyes should be able to read the whole first line, boom, and sing the first word. And it doesn't take very long. It's just a fraction of a second that it takes to read that whole line and then come back and sing the first word. Usually what happens is the slide's a little bit late, and so I am reading that first line as we're almost all the way through it. And so if you think about how many slides there are per song, and let's say there's 4 lines per slide, I'm losing the first line of every slide. So I'm losing a quarter of the song because of the timing issues. It's interrupting the worship. And what I want to happen is people just not only reading, but really internalizing what the words are saying as they're singing it. I'm a former worship pastor years ago, and so I really care about worship that doesn't get interrupted. And there's so many ways that things can get interrupted that we can't control, but this is one that we can, where we just get it right, and so that's the principle. So, and this is an art as much as a science, because when is the timing right? All right, principle number 2 then, what's this say down here? Can't see that. Oh, so we got to teach this, that you've got to rehearse this during the pre-service, to rehearse it to where you can figure out, am I able to read that whole first line before the next one goes in? And I reinforce it. As a pastor, I would work with my tech team and teach them it, tell them that. I'd rehearse it with them, give them a good thumbs up when they've got it, and make sure that they get it. And I have to reinforce it. If it was slow one week, I'd go back and say they were a little slow this week. Don't forget, I want to be able to read the whole first line. And vision leaks, and so you got to keep retelling people that over and over and over again. We have to hold ourselves accountable as a tech team to getting this right. And you know what I'm talking about here, where you've been to churches where the slides were just late every time. And particularly think about your visitors. Just like the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 14, what impact does your worship have on your guests? If your visitor does not know this song and the words are late already, he's struggling to keep up with the song, and then he doesn't know what this next line is, and it's already we're already singing it before he's able to read it. And so there's just no way worship's going to happen with this song for any of your guests if you're a little bit slow. All right, so So principle number 2 is related to this. It's better to go early than late. And a lot of people, slide people, they don't ever want to go early, but here's the reason why. Because just in the same way that I want to be able to quickly read the first line and then sing the first word, the reverse of that is true is on the previous slide, the slide that we're currently on, I have read the entire last line before we get to the last word. Usually my eyes have read that about the beginning of that line. And so if you advance the slide before the last word, or 2, or 3, your people are not going to be upset about that because they've read the whole last line already, and then they're just singing what they've already read. And so I would much rather, if you're going to err, hopefully you don't err and you just get the art of it, but if you err early, not late, because that gets people moving into the next slide that they've already read rather than getting to a slide that they haven't read. All right. And then transition principle number 3 is don't be surprised by any slides. I think you need to be there for practice, take notes, fix anything that needs to be fixed. Are there bridges or interludes or blanks or repeats? Those kind of things. Don't be surprised by any of those. And so hopefully as a tech team, you're there during the rehearsal in the morning, the band's rehearsal, and you're not just kind of going through them, but you're practicing just like the band is practicing, that they want to get it right for worship. You're practicing so that you get that transition right. And that's when you're practicing the art of how early can I advance this slide? Is it 1 word? Is it 2 words? Is it 3 words? And you're working on that. And I don't know where else I'd tell you about this, but in several of the churches where I have pastored, we have had production managers, which is an extra volunteer on your tech team. And they kind of stand behind the lights and sound and projection, and they're kind of calling the shots, and they're reminding people what's coming up, and they're encouraging people. That was good. That was a great transition. And so I would encourage, if you don't have that role on your tech team, to consider doing that. This is the person that can fill in if anything happens, but they would say, hey, we've got a video coming up, sound guys, the video ready to go. How many times have you been at a church where the video starts but the audio is not ready, and then the audio comes in a half a sentence into it or something like that? And so having this production manager that stands behind the rest of the team and keeps them going is a great idea. All right, so those are the 3 transition principles, but I can't tell you how critical this is to get this right, that you've got this rhythm, this art of getting the slides advanced properly so that people can just seamlessly flow through a song and not have the first line of every song they're waiting for, and they're getting frustrated. And that's the last thing we want. We just want them thinking about the words of the song rather than how the slides are moving. And so hopefully they don't even notice how things are going because it's so smooth. All right. So now I want to get into here. And while we're doing that, again, don't forget you can hit any questions and answers that you'd like. I need to share the screen again. Where did that go? Here we go, share. So I want to talk about slide composition, and I want to drive a third poll on this one, as I'm just very curious at the churches that we've got represented here tonight. Who makes your slides? It's different in every church, and there's no right or wrong, but let me get to that poll here. Let's see here. Is it the minister, the church secretary? Is it the worship staff? Is it a volunteer? Or is there a group of people that take turns? And so I'm just really curious if you'd chime in on who. But the next part is what I'm going to give you at least 9 tips on how to make your slides look really great. All right, so while you're hitting that poll, about half of you have chimed in so far. Let me look at my notes right here. All right. All right, so I'm going to put that off to the side. Move this down here. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about is the copyright credits. Hopefully, you are giving credits as you use your songs. And I see a wide variety of how churches indicate that on their slides. My value for this is that it's as least intrusive as possible. And so I want to talk about that a little bit. There's been many churches that I've seen, including one that I've worked at, where we decided to put a statement in the pre-service slides that would say all songs performed today are being performed under copyright license number whatever. And so I wanted to check before this seminar to make sure that was legal. So I called the Christian Copyright Licensing Agency. Hopefully you all have a Christian copyright license that you purchase. And if you don't, I would recommend that you do that, CCLI. And I asked them, what's the protocol for how you indicate the copyright for the songs? The author of that song deserves the credit for writing it, and the producer of that song, who kind of owns the rights to it, deserves the credit for you using it. And so we've got to do that. And so what's the parameters for that? And so they told me very clearly, let me go back to that slide, what is required there. And so you have to have the title, the author, the publisher, the year that it is made, and your licensing number should be displayed with each song. So I found out that it's not legal to do the old general, hey, at the beginning of the service, everything we do today is going to be under this number. That's unfortunate in my book. But the law is the law, and we got to obey the law. If anybody's going to obey the law, it ought to be the church. And so, but here's the deal that I asked again, because when I was a worship pastor 25 years ago, I called them to ask the same questions. Back then, we were making, for you young folks, you'll never believe this, we were making the slides, like the projection slides, we would make them during the week and then stick them in the carousel. And so I called the copyright license and said, what's legal for me to do? Well, here's the principle I will tell you that's still true today. Their protocol currently does not require a minimum font size. It needs to be legible. And that's what it says, legible. And I asked again, is there a minimum? And they say no. And so I'll let you take that for what it means. But I would tell you, I would make that as small as possible. First of all, I would put it at the last slide of the song, not the first. When I'm getting into that song, I want folks thinking about that song. And so I'm not going to put all the copyright information on the first slide of the song. First of all, I don't like title slides that happen. I don't think you need a title for a song. I think just the words should come up. And so there's still churches that I go to where there's the title slide before the first slide of the lyrics. And you can eliminate that, but I would put this at the end. But if you're using, let's say, 72 font for your worship slides for that song, I would put it way down to the bottom, like almost as a footer, and I would see what's the smallest font where it's authentically legible. Now, they do not say who it's legible for. Is it someone on stage, someone in the back of the room, or anywhere else? Their protocol does not say. So that's for you to choose, but I would tell you, I would make it very small, just so it's the least obtrusive to what's happening with worship. So that's the first tip I would tell you is you've got to get copyright correct as you make the slides. Put it the last slide, down to bottom, very small font. All right. Here's the next one. Let me close up that deal. What about fonts? What fonts should you consider using? And there are churches that I go to that the fonts, they're using old fonts. And just like anything else, like, the seasons go by and fashion people create new fashion every year, and the old stuff somehow looks old when the new stuff comes in. The same is true for fonts. And so if you've been using the same font for 10 or 15 or 20 years since you started projecting, you may want to consider changing your fonts. There are more modern fonts to use. And so I pinged one of our worship pastors at a church where I like the font that they use and asked them what they're using. And I've seen this one from several. Here's one, I'm going to tell you about 3 or 4 of them. This one, I don't even know how it's pronounced, Bibis Nue or something like that. It's all caps, which is interesting. And that's a trend that I'm seeing, is an all caps font eliminates the need for capitalization or not. It just is there. And so there's another one that goes with that, and it's this one, Avenir. This one does have caps and lowercase, and so they kind of go together well. And so you can kind of see what that looks like here if it were on the screen. And then there's another one that I like, which is this one. There's Avenir is here. Well, there's two more here, Leto and Nunito, or if that's pronounced, and maybe it's not Spanish, but you can see what they look like. And I think they look modern and fresh on stage. People are hitting me with chats or questions here. Hold on a second, 2 Q&As. Where's our chat? Make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay. And oh, here's the questions. We're going to get to those. All right. Thanks for sending your questions in, and we will get to those at the end here. All right. Let me get rid of that. So here's the website that I use to find the fonts, and all of these can be found on it, www.fontsquirrel.com. And most of them are free. If you get a font that you really like, and it costs you $6, that's a bargain. So that's what I would have to say about fonts. If you have questions about that, ping me for that. I want to get through here so I can get to questions. Here's another thing that I see very common in churches as their slides is the number of slides they use varies from church to church. And I want to give you my preference that I think is useful, and I'll give you the reason why. But the question is, how many lines per slide should we use? And here's the principle, that you create slides to promote worship flow. It's not about what's easy for you as the slide advancer. And as we're seeing, some of the trending is for fewer lines per slide, which means you've got to stay on top of things. But this whole thing that we're trying to do, just like 1 Corinthians 14, is we want worship to go seamlessly. And so we're worried about that. How can I produce a slide so that it promotes the best worship? So let's talk about that a little bit. So for the majority of churches, the majority of worship scenarios, in my opinion, 3 or 4 lines should be your goal. On some occasions, depending on the song, 5 or 6 lines can be used, but I would use spaces with that. I'm going to explain that here in a second, but never 8 or more lines. I was at a church about 2 months ago where there were 8, 10, 12 lines per slide. And it was almost like 1 slide per song. And so it was real easy to advance it. You never screwed up. You never screw up on a song if you only have 1 slide per song, but it was nearly illegible. I was sitting up in the second row because I was going to speak, and I had a hard time reading the words. So let me illustrate what I mean by this, and you all know what I'm talking about. Here's a pretty familiar worship tune. This is Amazing Grace. And on this one, it's 8 lines. And a lot of churches might use this. I would say it's very easy, and it's really in 2 parts. Most songs, if they have 8, it's 2 4s. And so if we take the first half of that, that's so much more legible than the first one. And what I would tell you is, in this, if you look at this right now, as I'm looking at this one, the middle 3 lines, line 4, 5, and 6, are a blur to me because there's so much there. And if that's true, then when we get to lines 4, 5, and 6, I'm not worshiping. I'm hunting, trying to keep up with where things are. And so I'm interrupting worship just because of the way I've produced the slide. And so if you go to 4, I can read all 4 lines, no problem. Same thing is true if I go to 6. Here's the song here. Who breaks the power of sin and darkness, the King of glory, the King above all kings. Maybe you know this song. But again, even with 6 lines, lines 3 and 4 and 5 kind of get a little fuzzy. I don't want to read all that. And so I would prefer that you go to 3, the first 3 here, just cut it and paste it into 2 songs. I can read all 3 and then advance again. Now there's some slides where I think that it makes occasionally, not often, where either 6 or 5 lines are kind of called for. So for example, in this slide right here, if you are going to use all 6 lines, put a line in the middle where there's an obvious break, a breath, if you know this song, you know what I'm talking about. But here's what I do. There's a lot of slides that I see where that line just kind of makes the slide look a little wonky. And all I would do with that is a little trick is I have highlighted that center line, and let me go to format. If you're gonna watch me here, let me kill that right here. I'm going to come back to that, but this is, I got too much stuff in the way. 64, that font, that line, just like all the rest of the font, is 64. All right, and the font size that you're going to use is going to be based on your auditorium. But in here, it's a 64. But if I highlight just that, and I say, let's go to 24 instead, that looks a lot better. There's enough of a break between the first three and the second three that it helps me see it, but then it doesn't create this odd space in between 3 and 4. And all it did was changing the sides of the blank line compared to, and a lot of people would never think to do that. All right, so there's the 64 and the 24. Same thing is true with a 5 line. If there's ever some songs, every once in a while, it's a 3 to 2. And so if you get that, put a little line, that's the 24 line again, put the little line in between that helps you read that 3rd and 4th line. They don't get squished in the middle and they're not legible. All right, let's move on. So the trend that I'm seeing is for simple modern fonts, even 2 lines per slide, center justified, and let me get this out of the way here. And even I'm seeing a lot of the larger churches, which I really like, having a translucent ribbon underneath the font text box. So here's a picture of what I mean. This is a church that my family attends. If you look up here, you see this, the moving background is in the back, and then they've got this modern font, all caps, and there's this ribbon that stays the same. It's translucent, and then there's 2 lines in there. Now here's what I tell you. So I like the cleanness. That's very modern. Makes you look really good real quick. Here's the thing I tell you is make sure your ribbon is big enough for 3 lines, not just 2, because occasionally the song requires 3 lines. And and I've seen churches do this, and then when it's required 3 lines, and then the white's up into the margins, and it looks kind of tacky, or they'll do 2, and then they're out of kilter because the 3rd line is with the first line of the next slide, and they're kind of off. So make sure your ribbon is big enough to take 3 lines, not just 2, even though you're using 2. All right, there's that picture. All right, so where are we at? Number 4, make sure your phrasing matches your lyrics. Have you ever seen this? And again, this is thinking about your guests, or people, might not even be your guests, but some of your attenders that come less regularly. You know, when I grew up, we went to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, we never missed. But in this day and age, there's a lot of people that come once a month, once every 8 weeks. And what's the odds the last time that they were there that they sang this song? Not very good. And so the last time they sang this song might have been 6 months ago. And so they may not know the song very well. And so we need to help them, particularly with their phrasing. And so here's one, the same song that we just did, that really should be 3 lines, but it was made into 4, and the phrasing doesn't match the lyrics. And so if I don't know this song very well, I need to get this into a way where the phrasing matches how the song is sung. So make sure as you're looking at your slides, as you're producing your slides, you kind of sing along and make sure it works. All right. Eliminate orphans. I don't know if you know what orphans means, but an orphan is just when there's a single word at the end of a line. And a lot of churches I go to, there are orphans, and they drive me bananas. Well, and so here's an example. I grabbed this one. This was an online slideshow that you could get, and what you're buying has the orphan. I've tasted and seen the sweetest loves, where my heart becomes free and my shame is undone. That's uncalled for, fixable. You should never have a single word. And so if I were going to do this, I would do one of 2 things. Either I would reduce the font to such a size that it would fit, or I would enlarge my margins so that free won't be tagged around at the end. But that should be 4 lines, not 5, and because there's an orphan sitting there. So don't allow yourself to do this. Now, what I would say, and I don't know if I said this before, is whoever produces your slides, and we asked that poll on who does that, but I think you need to get a second set of eyes on your slides before Sunday morning. Someone needs to look at it with a view towards what it's going to look like on screen. And when you've produced them, it's just like anything else. You don't see the things that are wrong because you've just been flying through there and you don't notice it. And so a second set of eyes is really useful to make sure this culture of excellence that it's free happens. So this one would be caught by somebody and say, hey, there's an orphan on this slide. How can we fix that? All right. The next thing I'd say, number 6, we've got 9 of these, so we got 4 to go. 6, 7, 8, 9. 6 is make sure your font or your margins are as large as you can get for legibility. And I will see churches where this is about typical on their screen, and look at all the white space. Now there's background going on there behind typically, although there's a new trend, believe it or not, with a lot of churches, real young churches, the millennials, they're going to screens that looks like this, as simple as you get, no moving background, no background, black on white or white on black. But I'm trying to get people to read these words, and the difference between that and that, same lyrics, that, I'm going to go back, that, or that. And it costs me nothing to fix that, but churches will, and I'm sitting in the first 3, 4 rows typically, and I think if people are way back in the back, how legible are these words going to be for them? And so I want to think about the person in the back row, not in the middle or the front. And you got to play with that every week to get your default font size. Is it 36? Is it 48? 64? 72? What is it that you kind of start with? Sometimes folks say, well, I can't enlarge it anymore because then I get orphans. And so what I would say about that is what I was saying here. Here's that first slide with the words. And if we increase the font, we're going to get either the word place and cross are going to come around to be orphans. And what I'll say is don't fix this, is go and fix this. Fix my text box needs to be larger so it doesn't force a wraparound. And then I can get up to the size that's needed. And so a lot of people haven't thought of that. All right, let's keep moving right along. This goes again with that value of I want my words as close to the worship leader as possible. And sometimes it's useful to top or bottom justify within the projection, not just where the projection is hitting on the projection screen, but within your produce slide, you can affect that. And here's what I mean. All right, on this slide right here, it's way too low, obviously, and I've raised my projection to be justified on the high end to get a little bit higher, but my words are still defaulted in the middle. And so all I need to do here is top third justify that. And your slide is going to default towards center justification, right and left, and top and bottom. But there's no worship police that comes out and says you have to be right in the middle. And so in this particular church, I would top third justify my words as the default. I was at a church this summer where the projection screen was just barely above, and they had the words right in the middle, and it was more like, like this. And I'm like, why are you not putting that up where your last line is like right above everybody's head? And so the reverse of that is if your screen is way high, for some reason the way your worship is you're going to put it down as low as possible in the worship area, but then I would also kind of bottom third this where it's that much closer to the worship leader who's up on stage. And the background behind that's going to be nice and visible and all that, but it's going to get me less of this going back and forth between the words and the worship leader. So some people will never thought of that. They think that's just going to be center justified every time, but that'll look just as good if you get used to that. So experiment with that maybe. 2 more to go. And these are big. Design your scripture slides for maximum impact. And I'm going to start talking like an old preacher here. But what I want to tell you is that a lot of churches that I go to and visit, and you know what I'm talking about, the scripture slides are the ugliest slides in the slide deck. They're done at the last minute because the preacher didn't get you the slides for the scriptures or whatever until Saturday night. And they're usually like on a black screen, and they're all crammed in there. It's illegible. And here's the old preacher in me. Of all the slides that we produce, shouldn't the Word of God be the best looking one? And not the ones that are kind of thrown in at the end. And I've got a picture here of an example of that. This is a good church. They've got great projection and LED lights and great worship. They had great background on their screens. And then this preacher got up, and fortunately that's bright enough you can't tell who it is. But here's his scripture slide from Matthew chapter 6 from the Sermon on the Mount. And if you can tell, I'm on the 3rd row, and I take this picture. I don't want to read that slide. It's too small. It's all crammed together. And I think you could make your scripture slides look absolutely great. Dress up the Word of God, and make it your best slide. Make it a work of art. And don't just kind of throw it in at the end. So think about that. And that may be really pressuring your preacher to get you at least the scriptures before Saturday night. If he can get to you on Thursday or Tuesday or whatever, even if all of his points don't come in, you can work on the slides so that they look really good. And so if you can do one scripture, one sentence, think of it as a work of art. Where sometimes there's a scripture where there's just a few words that bang, you want those in there, just the 4 words that you're hammering home or whatever. And so particularly if you're a preacher that's on tonight and you make your own slides, think about how you can use your scripture as to promote what you're trying to say with your sermon, and not just kind of throw them in there. All right, that's enough of me being an old preacher. Last one. Design communion instruction slides to put your guests at ease. And what I mean by this is you can have a beautiful slide that explains, here's what we're going to be doing today during communion. And here's the trick, and this is, I'll have to explain this, is display your instruction slide immediately as you verbally segue into your time of communion. And here's why. Your guests, the minute you start talking about communion, are thinking, oh no, how do they do that here? And they're getting sweaty palms, they're looking around, and while they're doing that, they are not listening to what you are saying, because they are worried about, because the last church they went to didn't take it, the one they went to as a kid, they took it this way by intinction where you dunk it in, or they went up and had someone put it on their tongue or whatever, and they're worried about how you take, they don't know. And so here's the trick, is to put an instruction slide up there that says, hey, at our church, we take communion every week, and we hold it and then take it together, or we take it as passed or whatever. And that needs to go up as you're talking. And here's why. They can listen and read at the same time. And if you don't put it up there, there's all this nervousness. And I'm a visitor, I'm a preacher, and I visit churches every Sunday, and I'm nervous that I don't know how they're going to take it in a few seconds, and I'm missing what they're talking about because I'm trying to figure out how they're going to take it. How much does an unchurched or a previously de-churched guest, how worried are they at this time? And so if you put those instructions up early, you'll put them at ease, and then they'll listen to the rest of what you're saying. And your guests or your regulars, if they see that every week early, they won't read it because they know what it says. And so they're not going to be offended by you putting this instruction slide up there while you're talking. They'll look up, look back at you, and listen because they've read that a million times. And as a pastor of church, I had to work with my tech crew to get them to put this up early every week. And it was hard. And here's why. Because they think they're being rude to put it up while you're talking. And so they'll let you talk about communion, and then you'll say, let's pray or whatever, and that's when they put the instructions up. But by then it's too late. Your guests have been sweating for 5 minutes as you're talking about communion, and they're praying, so their eyes are closed while they should be reading, or it's even up after the guys start passing it, and by that time it's too late. And so I've got a communion, well, I don't have one. This is the only one I had real quick, is create something there, but in this area here, you want to go ahead and explain this is what we're doing today. You might need to have different ones if you do communion differently periodically during the year. If you pass it some weeks and take it as passed, or hold on to it, take it together, or you go up to stations and take it from stations, or you take it by intinction where you dunk it in, whatever, is make sure that's clear for your guests. All right. There we go. You can tell, hopefully you're not judging me right now by thinking, wow, that dude's got a lot of pet peeves about slides. I need to unshare that. There we go. All right, how do I get out of that? Stop share, there we go. Those are the things that we got there. We've got about 5 minutes. I've got some questions I want to pull up here. And if you've got any other questions to give me, let's see. One is about old songs in the hymnal. There are certain songs, and I don't know what the date is anymore, that they are called public domain, where after a certain amount of time, 100 years or whatever, they're not required. I think there should be continuity. So if you're going to do it for one song, do it for all, and you can just say public domain. To me, it's going to be almost moot because I'm going to use a font that's so small, it's legible from stage, that it's not going to be a big deal. But you don't have to give you copyright credit for songs that are public domain. But I would still say written by Fannie J. Crosby, who wrote so many of our great old hymns, and public domain and so on. Another question here, talking about rule and not the exception. I'm reading this. How do you suggest handling being early with the slide transition when you're working with an unpredictable worship leader? Oh gosh, who's prone to spontaneous repeats? Wow, that's a great question. I don't know if I got a good answer to that. You have to quit having a spontaneous worship leader. And as a worship leader, former worship leader, I know that's tricky. That would lead me to say, number one, is one thing that I do not prefer is if you ever put in parentheses the word repeat or 4x or whatever. If the worship leader sings that and repeats it, people are going to repeat that, and you've taken notes and you've rehearsed that you're just going to leave it up there until we've sung it 4 times. But I just think it's awkward to put those little parenthetical phrases in there to help your audience. And so I don't prefer that. The only thing I would say, and this isn't very helpful, is if you send it early and then he goes off somewhere else, he's the one that looks like he's off, not you. If you wait and you're late, you're looking like you're the one off, not him. And so if you advance slides in a rhythm with the art of getting early and then he goes somewhere else, everybody can tell where'd the worship leader go? And so he's the one looking crazy. It's not much of an answer. Bumper or no bumper? I don't know exactly what the word bumper means here. Do they distract from the flow of worship or help? If that's a video bumper, I do, particularly the church that I last was the minister at, we did create bumpers so that people moving on stage, things were happening. And so there was never a moment where it was quiet while someone was walking on stage. And so even if it was 15 or 30 seconds, which is all you need to get on stage, and it doesn't have to be wild and crazy, but just a little bumper. But I don't like bumpers just for bumpers and then everybody's watching for no reason. But if it's a time to get the whole band off stage and the ministers coming up on stage, then I'm an advocate of that because it keeps people's eyes focused on the screen rather than all this stuff going on. So hopefully that explains that. But what I don't like, and this is really tricky, is bumpers that are too long. And so you got to figure that out. How long in your church does it take your preacher to get up on stage, get his notes out, and so on? Because he gets up there and then there's another 15 seconds of bumper, and that's just awkward. So you got to fix that. All right. So hopefully I've answered your questions. Those are great questions. Let me transition right to the very end. I want to thank you all for being a part of this. I want to give credit to our, let me share screen here one last time, our ministry partner, Mid-Atlantic Christian University, that's allowing us to have this platform to have our monthly webinars. But I also want to announce something new tonight. You all are the very first ones, and that is we are releasing here at the end of the year and going to the next year a new way for individuals to partner with Waypoint. It's brand new. We have a number of churches, 120 churches that support us monthly or annually to do what we do to serve churches and start new ones. But a way that individuals can do that is to join iplantchurches.com. And you can give as little as $5 as a person or $10 as a couple or whatever on a recurring basis and help us plant more and more churches every year to reach more and more people. And so there'll be a link to this in your automated email, and we may send you an email next week to invite you to be one of the first people that would go to iplantchurches.com and give $5 a month as an individual. And every dime of that's going to go to help plant new churches. And so hopefully that you'll join us in that. I also want to tell you, and then we're done, our next webinar, we're going to skip December here with the holidays, is coming up the first week of January. And if you would let your youth leaders know, we're going to have a couple youth leaders sharing with us some ways to have great youth events, maybe some ones that you've never thought of having before. And so we're going to spend 55 minutes talking about great youth events to fill out your youth calendar in 2018. So there'll be a link to that in your automated email tomorrow. And if you would forward that link, or at least tell your youth leaders about that, hopefully they'll register for and join our webinar on Thursday afternoon, January 4th. Well, thank you for your time tonight. Thank you for your partnership with Waypoint. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. My email will be included on the automated email tomorrow, and would love to help you have a seamless slideshow at your church so that it just leads to uninterrupted worship, where people are just really internalizing the power of the words that they're singing to God. Have a great night, and we hope we see someone from your church on January 4th.